Hey, you guys ready to eat some fetuses? No? Shit!
Childhood is never easy for anyone, and I understand. I am more aware of this than most. Some of us get bullied by our peers, some of us are abused by our caregivers, and some of us are different. I had a good childhood up until the day of meeting her. My parents loved me, and my social life was that of a semi-popular kid. My neighborhood was safe on the part of living in a relatively middle-class cul-de-sac, where we all looked out for one another and visited each other often. Then in one day, in the space of under 24 hours, no one came to our house again. I never knew it was a twin until I met her on my 10th birthday. All of my friends and family gathered around our table while I blew out my candles, singing and cheering me on as I excitedly cut the first slice of my favorite homemade chocolate cake. Then I heard it. Among the voices, a small girly voice crying behind all this joy. This caught my attention as it sounded similar to my cry, yet with a slight undertone of unfamiliarity. I glanced around the room to see if I could locate the noise, but at first, nothing seemed out of place, as everyone was still in the same positions as before, until I saw myself on the mirror. In the mirror, where my shadow would have been, there were two. The other shadow faced diagonal from my own, yet it was hunched over and visibly shaking, which presumably meant that this was the source of the odd but barely audible sound. Then it happened. The second shadow began straightening from its bent position and morphed into mine. It just walked into mine. Suddenly, and much to the horror of my guests, I threw up all over my own cake. Long strands of hair and teeth mixed with my vomit as my body convulsed uncontrollably. The hair that crawled its way from my throat was identical to mine, ginger and wavy. Just when the look of shock from everyone began to turn to concern, I felt myself urinate all over the floor. And that's when the screaming began. I couldn't stop that awful screaming. The urge to glance in the mirror was far too great, and once I did, I saw her in all her unholy glory. She was nothing more than a chewed-up fetus, a tiny scrambled mess of veins, hair, and fingernails formed into something almost humanoid. Her little body rose up to my height in the mirror, and she spoke to me. Her bodily fluid leaving a mess all over my pale skin, and she told me of her terrible fate. A guttural voice quickly scratched itself from a hole in her flesh and relayed a tale of how when our mother was pregnant, the doctor found out she was pregnant with twins. Yet when it came to our birth, only I arrived. There was no trace of my twin anywhere, even though in all the scans and tests prior to delivery, she was still alive and there. Everyone was equal parts confused and devastated when she didn't come into this world, but they stayed optimistic for my sake. When my mother painfully pushed me out into existence, the amount of blood that came from her body was too great for that of a normal delivery. But when they tested to see how much she had actually lost, it turns out her blood volume was normal. That's when the voice laughed and bitterly spewed into my ear that it was her blood that covered our mother's thighs, that I had miraculously ripped her apart with my gums and devoured her organs just before we were meant to embrace twinhood together. In the duration of our development, I had been chewing off parts of her from my own incessant hunger, peeling her skin off and gnawing on her limbs. The doctors believed she had just developed incorrectly, and that she would need help after she was born. Although now I know the truth, and she never forgot. When I looked back down at my cake, I saw the gruesome reality of what I had just done. Tiny bones, organs, a pair of tiny eyes, and mass amounts of hair lay resting all over the sugary treat. My friends and my family all quickly left, screaming that what was going on here was the work of something evil. Just before they had time to run, they witnessed me doing what I know had to be done. It must be done to save myself from the terrors of my never-developed twin. I consumed her once more, shoveling bowels and tendons down my throat coated in chocolate icing and candle wax. Vomiting as the feast began, I had to eat that, along with my twin's body, as no part of her could be allowed to be physically present on this earth. Now I have had to eat my twin 4 times. On my 20th birthday, she made her way out of my esophagus, wailing and crying from the mirror in front of me, and I watched myself slurp up her intestines from the floor with no real remorse, as this was something that was required to be done. It was my 30th birthday yesterday, and just as predicted, fingers and toes ran themselves up my body and onto the floor, then back down into my stomach acid to be dissolved for the 4th time. This time, I had much more of a reason to worry about this event occurring, as recently some brilliant news has been delivered to me and my husband. I'm pregnant with 2 beautiful, lovely, perfect little girls. They seem perfectly healthy, apart from one minor issue. One of my gorgeous little angels isn't developing as quickly as the other. She also may be missing some limbs, but that doesn't matter. I will love her, no matter what.
Follow me on Instagram and Twitter for more wonderful things like this. Thanks so much for watching. Try not to die today.